Hi, everybody. Thanks again for your patience today. For those of you who came to class and found that we had technology issues. As promised, I wanted to record for you some pieces of the lecture that we didn't get a chance to talk about. So this is the slideshow you would have had everything been working for us. Okay, so first of all, the things that I wanted to talk to you about were introducing you to the subject matter and also introducing you to the course. But before we go into detail on that, there are some slides that the university is really wanting instructors to show to all students. And the first of those is a policy that students and faculty do a daily health assessment. And in case you're wondering why my voice is all croaky, these are allergies. But if students do feel ill, something feels like it's not the usual, first and foremost, please do stay at home. This is something that we have some advice around here on the slide. There are different steps that you can take, and I have provided you all with my email, but I will provide it again at the end of this presentation too. Just let me know that you're not feeling well, and that is fine. Our goal is to prevent the spread of this horrible virus. The second thing, and people were really great about this today, is wearing your masks in indoor public spaces and classrooms. That goes for me too, but fortunately right now I am recording this in a safe space. Cover your mouth. Even with a mask, if you do have to sneeze, let's try to reduce that spread as much as possible. And of course, keep your hands clean. These are, again, things that the university wants everybody to be reminded of. And finally, we all have to complete a vaccination self-declaration. So this is another reminder of that. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the subject matter. So there are three things we're going to cover in this course. One of them is the whole topic of what is urban geography. Many of you are quite familiar with this, so it's just a really rudimentary overview. Then talking about what's different about planning, and then look at some professional skills development work. And we did talk about some of this in class, but I just want to capture it here again for everybody. So urban geography, one of the first things that I know a lot of you pointed out today is that it's concerned with the social aspects of places, with how human society is rooted in place, is distributed spatially. It also is focused on settlements, on where people are living and working and what's going on in those settlements. And there are a few other points that are raised by urban geographers Hall and Barrett. They have put up these four bullet points, summarize what they have to say about cities. In this class, we're going to focus on two aspects of urban geography. That is, we're going to take a little closer look at some of the internal nature of different cities. And then we're also going to look at the relationship between cities and their broader regions, provinces, and so forth, the city systems. So let's talk a little bit more about the internal nature of different cities. We did speak briefly in class about the role, for example, of transportation in shaping how cities are laid out. And this graph here that I wanted to show you is an example of how connections can make some neighborhoods more accessible than others. In this diagram, you'll see that place B seems very well connected, while place A has very limited connections to other parts of the city. So that interest in how cities are laid out is a really important part of urban geography. And I just wanted to give a couple of vivid examples of this. So we talked in class today about transit stations, especially in larger cities, and how they can help shape the broader area around them. And these are some examples from Atlanta. In the top left is an unbuilt station, and then on the bottom right is an unbuilt station in San Francisco. So again, these are great examples of how infrastructure and different patterns can produce different patterns and settlements in a city. Okay, so I wanted to give us just a little mini case study, again, delving into that transit aspect from an area that's nowhere near British Columbia, Atlanta, Georgia. And Atlanta, like a number of different cities, especially in the east side of North America, really relied on rail at one point in its history to help provide connections both between Atlanta and other cities, as well as within Atlanta. And so Atlanta had a railway that was known as the Beltline, and that sort of teal-colored oval kind of gives you a sense of where the Beltline ran. And of course, there were a lot of industries that sprang up all around the Beltline because it was a great way to ship things. You could send whatever you produced to and from different parts of the city. But after the Second World War, especially when the United States started investing heavily in highways as an alternative to rail, then the Beltline was just not as important as it once was. And so the line fell into disuse. But what was really exciting is just at the start of the 21st century, a master's student in architecture and planning named Ryan Gravel actually wrote a thesis on this Beltline and its potential for being so much more than just an abandoned rail corridor. So his thesis sat around for a while, did nothing, but then eventually it inspired a grassroots movement, not unlike the High Line in New York City, to build a kind of new public amenity on what was the Beltline. And so what happened was this became, and this is not a project that's completed, but a significant portion of it has been completed. So it's become kind of like the Galloping Goose Trail in Victoria, if you're familiar with that, or the Lochside Trail, or the ENN, an amenity for pedestrians and cyclists. But they've also made a really big deal out of having it as a place to display art, public art. So a large portion, much larger than anything we've seen in British Columbia, of the Beltline actually is decorated by public art. So this is an example of one of the entry points to the Beltline. You can see there's sort of an older industrial building to the left of the dotted oval. And then this is another example in the bottom right of some more art close to the Beltline, some great signage. And again, here's an example where there's some new development that has sprung up around this. What's interesting though is rather than new development being spurred on by rail transit, it's a great example of how this cycling infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure is becoming an attraction for new residential development. And that's exciting in many respects, but it also creates challenges. Does that mean that every time we build a new cycling connection, that housing will become more desirable and therefore more expensive? And here's another example of some of the public art along the Beltline. And not just public art, but some green infrastructure here to address some of the stormwater runoff, as well as some really exciting retail and restaurant services below residential. So we've talked a little bit more about how urban geography is interested in the relationship of cities and the broader context surrounding them. I want to use an example now from Victoria to understand this. So whether or not you're from Victoria, you know that Victoria is situated on an island, and it's the capital of both the province and a really important hub for the island as a whole. So certainly urban geography is interested in the relationships between Victoria and other centers on the island. You know, what do people need to do in Victoria who live in Duncan or Nanaimo versus what can they do within their communities? There's also a relationship between Victoria and Vancouver, and it's certainly, although my arrows probably should have shown two ways, it's certainly a strong relationship. We have so much of our food and so many of our consumer goods that come to us via the Port of Vancouver. But at the same time, as a provincial capital, Victoria also provides some amenities and services to Vancouver. And then of course that goes for the province as a whole. So understanding that relationship between our city and the rest of the province helps us better know what's going on with the city and how we might need to plan for it. And finally, Victoria has a connection to other centers outside of Canada that are really close by, like Seattle. So in a non-pandemic time, we would find a lot of tourists on our city streets all year round who've come from Seattle, sometimes just for a day trip. And often that's because they might have fond memories of coming here when they were younger, because there were really strong connections between Victoria and other American West Coast cities, especially before the railway was built across Canada. In fact, so much activity happened between Victoria and San Francisco that it almost felt like this was not necessarily part of Canada until the railway came into being. So there are many more things that we could discuss around urban geography, and many of you may have already delved deeper than that, but I wanted to just give a broad sense of what urban geography is interested in and then compare it to planning. and because both topics are important and will be covered in this course. So planning can be a really broad thing and hard to define for some people, but I like this definition from one of the people I studied with, John Friedman, who's a very well-known American planning theorist who has worked as a practitioner and has done a lot of really amazing planning theory work. Unfortunately, John is no longer with us, but John came up with this really great catch-all definition, which is that planning is the application of knowledge, represented by this book and this tree, applied to action in the public domain. So what that tells us is that there are three parts of planning that are really important. The first part is knowledge, knowing things about the city. So some of the urban geography analysis can be a very important part of knowledge. But there are other kinds of knowledge too that I expect us to get into in this class, including knowledge that we have of what is healthy, what is medical good evidence, knowledge of public policy, knowledge of local places from people who have lived there, so that lived experience piece. First Nations, traditional cultural knowledge is another piece of knowledge. So really even being clear on what is acceptable knowledge to inform planning can be quite a tricky thing to do, and it's something planners debate a lot. But in any case, we know we need to have that knowledge base, but it's not enough just to have that knowledge base. We have to think about then how to act, which is why today when I spoke to you, I was talking about the value of knowing how to speak to an audience. Because if you can't convince people with decision-making power to take the knowledge that you're offering and act on it, then we haven't done our job as if we're trying to be planners. And then the third piece in the public domain is really about recognizing it's not about directing individual actions necessarily, but actions that will shape the common world that we have around us. And then finally, we're going to be talking in this course about professional skills development. So, of course, you're going to be building knowledge and practice-based approaches, but I also wanted to raise the importance of cultivating your own knowledge as a learner. And this is about being aware of your own strengths and weaknesses. You don't have to share that with me, but I really encourage you to think a lot and be honest with yourself about where you're really strong and where you have some more learning to do. And that can involve even things like just knowing what time of day you think more effectively and work more effectively. So for example, I am a morning person. If I have something difficult to do, the best time for me to do it is between 10 a.m. and about 1 p.m. If you ask me to do anything late at night, it's got to be really easy. You might be the complete opposite though. And so just knowing even what time you personally work better at can help you be more successful as a learner and as a professional. And of course, there will be other things. But I want you to reflect also on these 4 skills as learners. The first of these is about listening. So as people who are going to be doing a group project, it'll be really important for you to be able to listen to each other. That doesn't just mean not talking and sitting there and thinking about what you're going to say next. It means trying to understand. It also means reading effectively. You've gotten this far, so obviously you do have some great reading skills, but I would encourage you to think about ways that you can read even more effectively. The third thing is focusing. Most of us now all have a lot of distractions in our lives, and a number of studies are starting to show that these distractions are real and they do sometimes sabotage some of the efforts that we want to make to complete tasks. So being aware of what distracts you and what helps you focus will be an important thing that you can do in succeeding in university. And the final piece that I wanted to talk about is having a growth mindset. So there's an American educational researcher by the name of Carol Dweck who has written on this topic. And one of the things she said is that a lot of students, especially when they get to university, have already been successful and they've probably had a lot of praise through their life for being smart, for being talented. And she said sometimes that can set people up, though, to worry about their image more than worry about learning. And I'm not saying for a minute that this is you, but I can certainly tell you that I've recognized times when it doesn't feel safe for people I've been working with, or even myself, to learn, to be open, because there's been too much of a sense of needing to protect one's reputation. So I wanted to show you in class a video about ways of thinking that will help you get in touch with your growth mindset. But instead, I'm going to put a link in Brightspace to this video clip. It's about 10 minutes long, and you may have seen it already, but probably not. And if you haven't, I would really encourage you to watch it, because what I want you to do ultimately is to feel like it's worth taking a risk in order to learn. And on that note, your very first assignment, which is a writing assignment and is in Brightspace, I am going to guarantee that if you try, and it's clear to me and to the teaching assistant who will be marking your work, or doing the first cut at marking your work, if it's clear that you have really tried, whether or not it's at the level that you should achieve a B+, I guarantee if you've tried, you will get, for the first assignment, a minimum grade of a B+. We will give you feedback to let you know where you probably would have scored and what you would need to do to improve if you did not reach that level. And of course, if you do better than a B+, you will get the actual grade that you've earned. But I just want you to feel safe about taking risks and encourage you to adopt that growth mindset. So this is, whoops, I'll just back up here. So this is a still from that. And this is actually somebody who is a science educator and journalist, and he has a lot of fun with crazy, wacky science experiments, including seeing what motivates people to take risks when learning. Okay, so now let's get into the course material itself. As you'll notice from the syllabus, I've organized the course loosely around 4 different themes, which I think will resonate with some of the comments that you were giving to everybody in class today. A few of you were talking about how lived experience and encounters with the material side of the built environment can actually be mutually interacting. So we're going to look at the theme of being in the city. So what do lived experiences in the city look like for different people? What does identity look like? And then how have we responded in terms of what are some of the conditions we are impacted by, and how does that in turn reshape some of those conditions? So if we feel that cities are too crowded, do we respond by trying to have more dense settlements later on? And that's something you'll see from our history in city life in the 20th century, especially, that happened. But then we're going to talk as well about thinking about the city, because a lot of plans and policies were shaped by bigger ideas that weren't just local to one place, but that were coming out of different centers around the world and have very far-reaching influences. We talked very briefly today about Patrick Geddes, who is a Scottish planner, bioregionalist, and some of his ideas actually extended to India in the 19th century. And then finally, shaping the city. So thinking about what that's actually meant for planning on the ground. So a few lectures will focus on just one of these themes, but most of them will recognize that it's hard to tease them apart from each other. Okay, and then finally, we talked today about how you'll be evaluated in this course. So you'll be asked to do several readings. I will also place a video or 2 on Brightspace for you to watch. You'll be given 5 short individual assignments and 1 major project, which is worth about 50% of your overall mark for the term, and includes individual and group components. So the first reading and your first assignment will be on summarizing and salience. So how do you summarize in ways that are salient or that matter to the person that you're writing for? And so in this first assignment, you're going to be writing for a newly elected councillor who knows nothing about city planning. And as I also mentioned, you're going to be doing some work for the City of Colwood, and we will post the different possible project topics that you can do on Brightspace sometime over the weekend before the start of Monday's class. So this is an image from the City of Colwood. It's the Esquimalt Lagoon, which is on this side here, the left-hand side, where the darker tree is and a little bit of red, is a really amazing bird sanctuary. And on the right-hand side of the image is the ocean. And so Colwood has just under 17,000 people, so it's not a huge community. It's a suburb of Victoria, and it is experiencing quite a bit of growth these days. It has a number of older residential homes, so some of them were built in the 1970s, 1980s, but it also has a really interesting place, Royal Roads University and Hatley Castle. And if you've ever seen the X-Men movies, you might recognize this castle from those movies. So that's it for now. As I've mentioned in class, and as I'll repeat again, please do feel free to email me if you have any questions or are having technical difficulties. And otherwise, please do the reading for Monday. That's just the reading on summarizing and salience. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully having a glitch-free class on Monday. So have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks again.